Nelson Mandela, the South African savior, the anti-apartheid activist. Ralihala Mandela was born an African prince on July 18, 1918 in Mvezu, Transeki, a small South African village. Ralihala's father served as a counselor to the tribal chiefs and was destined to eventually become a tribal chief himself. Mandela attended primary school in Kunu, where his teacher, Miss McGidney, gave him the name Nelson at the age of 7 in accordance with the custom to give all school children Christian names. Nelson's father died in 1930 when Nelson was just 12 years old, causing his life to change dramatically. Nelson was adopted by Chief Jangintaba Delingbu, the acting regent of the Thembu people, a gesture done as a favor to Mandela's father, who years earlier had recommended Jangintaba to be made chief.
Mandela took classes in a one-room school next to the palace, studying English, Xhosa, history, and geography. It was during this period that Mandela developed an interest in African history from elder chiefs who came to the Great Palace on official business. Mandela learned how the African people had lived in relative peace until the coming of the white people. According to the elders, the children of South Africa had previously lived as brothers, but white men had shattered this fellowship. While black men shared their land, air, and water with whites, white men took all of these things for themselves. John Gintaba groomed Nelson for leadership, letting him sit in on council meetings and sending him to the finest schools. Hearing the elders' stories of his ancestors' valor during the wars of resistance, he dreamed of also making his own contribution to the freedom struggle of his people. Through his learnings, he developed understanding eyes of devoted leadership for the good of his people.
In 1941, during a break in college, Nelson ran away from his home to Johannesburg, the wealthiest and largest city in South Africa, in order to avoid a prearranged marriage. For the first time in his life, Nelson is set free from the cave and comes face to face with the brutal reality of a racially divided South Africa. Nelson entered the city as an anonymous black person with no high rank in society, and he receives a first-hand experience of what black life is like for an urban black South African at the time. He receives immediate confrontation with the white apartheid racist state. Nelson Mandela arrives in Johannesburg familiar with two different types of languages: a deep historical language of his own learning and training within his tribal background, and another completely contemporary language of the law. Nelson brought these two languages together to form the language of human rights, using his big brain of revolutionary thought for an amelioration of social norms.
Nelson began attending meetings of the African National Congress, the ANC, an organization that aimed to establish a democratic government and fight against the apartheid policy of racial segregation throughout South Africa. At the same time, Nelson and Oliver Tambo decided to set up a low-price and accessible law firm that specialized in serving the black population and defending black clients against the apartheid law. During that time, Nelson married his first wife, Evelyn. The apartheid regime begins to be strongly built up during 1948 when the National Party comes into power. A year later, the ANC adopted civil disobedience as official policy. In 1952, the ANC launched the campaign for defiance of unjust laws, and Nelson traveled all of South Africa in support of that effort. The National Party government took steps to restrict Nelson's movements, banning him from attending any gatherings, and they confined him to Johannesburg. Nelson was made the chief volunteer of the Youth League's National Defiance Campaign, and that's when the authorities began to notice him. The government knew that they now had someone that they could not look away from. The government was aware of Mandela's rebellious mind of political activism for defending the integrity of his people.
In 1956, the government arrested Nelson and 150 other activists, charging them with treason. Nelson's relentless dedication to activism took a toll on his personal life, and his wife, Evelyn, left him. As Mandela waited 4 years for his trial, he met a beautiful young, independent-minded woman named Winnie, who became his second wife in 1958. In 1960, the South African government outlawed the African National Congress. On March 21, 1960, the Sharpeville massacre occurred in the South African township of Sharpeville. After a day of peaceful demonstrations, a crowd of about 6,000 black protesters went to the police station. The South African police opened fire on the crowd, killing 69 people, men, women, and children, and over 180 people were wounded. It is at this time that Mandela made the very difficult decision that nonviolent resistance was no longer enough. Mandela now urged the ANC to form an underground military wing and challenged that all-white government. Nelson used his thick skin of immense bravery for leading the resistance against the white oppressive regime. Since Mandela was wanted by the government at this time, he traveled abroad, secretly gaining support for the cause. In 1962, when returning to South Africa from military training in Algeria, he was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison. While in prison, Mandela was also charged with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. Mandela stood trial, but refused to defend himself because that would legitimize the state's case. Mandela received a life sentence to be served in the prison of Robben Island, 7 miles off the coast of Cape Town. Mandela had bloody scars of intense battle for accepting the repercussions of his actions.
Instead of being forgotten in jail, Mandela became a symbol for the movement to end apartheid. Behind bars, Nelson continued to influence people and events, and gradually and slowly, the government dissolved its racial barriers. Mandela was never discouraged by his struggle, and he saw the slowness of progress not as a reason to stop, but instead motivation to continue his efforts and hope. During the 1980s, several offers of release were made to Mandela on the condition that he renounces violence, but he refused. In February of 1990, the government declared the ANC legal and announced Mandela was to be released. After 27 years spent in prison, Mandela is released out into the world, returning back to his people, bringing them out of the darkness. Nelson emerged from prison with a spirit of reconciliation, not vengeance, which inspired the world and helped him to negotiate a peaceful end to segregation and urge forgiveness for the white government that had imprisoned him. Mandela has a forgiving heart of humble loyalty for forgetting the past.
Now freed at the age of 71, Mandela was named the head of the ANC. His work to help bring an end to apartheid earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993. In 1994, for the first time in more than 300 years, blacks in South Africa would have the opportunity to vote for their rulers. In 1994, at the age of 75, Nelson Mandela was elected president of his entire nation in a landslide, chosen by voters who proudly marked his name on their ballots. In becoming the president, Mandela moved the world because South Africa was a place that most people did not think would ever see black leadership. So for him to rise to power after being in prison for 27 years was a historical moment for not only South African natives, but for the entire world.
During his time as president, Mandela proved to be a master politician, knowing when to be unyielding and when to compromise. His marriage to Winnie came to an end in 1996, and in 1998, Mandela married his third wife, Graca, on his 80th birthday. At this point in his life, Mandela has gray hair of accumulated wisdom for ingenious actions and defined wrinkles of pure dedication for liberating and creating equality. The following year, Mandela stepped down as president of the ANC. Nelson used his stature to help mediate the civil war in Burundi, continue to work for human rights organizations, and promote AIDS awareness. On December 5, 2013, at the age of 95, Nelson Mandela died. Mandela leaves behind a legacy as one of the greatest peaceful freedom fighters of all time, and he continues to be a defining symbol of how one man can truly make a difference in the world.
Man has lived through a struggle that few nations know. He was detained in prison, missed seeing the growth of his children, his grandchildren, his relationships. He came out to see change happen, all that he had worked for. There must have been moments in that jail when he thought, this is too slow. I am so tired, and this is never gonna work. But God saw fit to have him see the day that I am sitting in his house as First Lady of the United States.